Hi, this is Lisa Schermerhorn, and welcome to my podcast, Lisa's Mindset Podcast. And I interview people who have overcome adversity and doing amazing things, giving back to people. And I want to tell you about a really special person I met a couple of years ago through the Y Institute. And I've met him in person. And his family is remarkable. He has a daughter who we're going to be talking about, Sophia, who's one of my favorite people on this earth. She's a mini 40-year-old. But Dan introduced me to the Y Institute, and he held my hand and helping me better understand how this worked and how people work. And he's a true contributor, and we're going to go into why that's important and why it makes who he is so remarkable. Dan, I'm going to let you tell your story. I just want you guys to know from my heart how much I deeply care about this man and what he has done to change my life in helping me do what I do. So thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And wow, what a great introduction. We were talking pre-show. How do you want to be introduced? And I said, introduce me from your heart. And that was so heartfelt. And I felt goosebumps as you were saying it, especially since you said some kind words about my family and my daughter, who, as you know, are very important to me. My family is the reason I do what I do and the reason I do it the way that I do it. But let me give you some kudos too, Lisa, because you and your partner, Kevin, way back when, were one of my early adopters. So for the last 4 years, up until December of 2023, I was the chief growth officer at the Y Institute. And I love what you said. Dan held my hand through this process because, as you know, that speaks to my heart as a contributor. You felt like I really supported you, and someone who has the Y of contribute loves to make a positive impact in the lives of others and make a difference. And so you saying that really touched me. And I really enjoyed both you and Kevin, but I really like what you've done with it, Lisa, with becoming Y certified and then making it such a crucial part of what you do to help people with their mindsets. And I still have your testimonial, your video testimonial. One day, this was a venture where we started working with coaches about 4 years ago to bring this tool into the hands of as many coaches as possible. And as I said, Lisa, you were one of the earlier ones. And the first time you used it with a client, I remember getting a phone call from you, and you were so enthusiastic and happy about the difference that it made. I believe it was a client who worked with engineers with the Y of Simplify, who didn't feel like he was complex enough for his clients, and you helped him actually use that as a superpower and then double his rates. So that was a great testimonial that I received. And then you recorded a video testimonial for me that I still use because the energy and the passion and the difference that it made for you and your client was so palpable that I had to share it with others.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting because even if you're not certified in Y, if you're familiar with the Ys, you get to know the people who you're talking to, and you can use the right language to help them. And as a matter of fact, this morning I was on a call with a friend of mine who just went into this whole diatribe of she's going through a very difficult time. And all I could hear in my head was contribute, because she was spending so much of her time and energy helping others. She wasn't helping herself. And I thought, okay, this
Right,
is such a contribute thing that it
right,
really helped me focus. I'm like, this is where I know where to help her. So as a coach, it has helped me in a way to cut down on the trying to figure out what someone's issue is and just
right.
letting me zero in on, okay, I already know where to go because I know what this person's issue is going to be with that why.
Yeah, and that is so special, and let's talk about that, Lisa. You use it almost as a shortcut, right? To help you understand, hey, these are the challenges that I'm probably going to have. And it's interesting because as we were talking pre-show, those are the challenges I've had my whole life. As a contributor, just sometimes you're so worried about helping everyone else. You want to make a difference for as many people as you can, that you tend to spread yourself thin. And now that I'm on this solo venture, right, on this solo journey, you realize you can't help everyone. right? And if you try to help everyone, you're not going to help anyone. So you have to realize you have to be really laser focused on who is it that I can make the most difference for. And those are the people I want to work for. And you have to say no to those people that aren't a fit also.
Right. And you know what? Here's the thing about contribute that I find so interesting is because they're the first ones to raise their hand. I want to help, I want to help. But if your background is not the best for that position, then
Right.
you're not helping. You're actually doing a disservice because it's going to take you 10 times as long and then you become resentful and frustrated. So it
Yes.
teaches you to have the discipline to pull back and say, by helping, I can say no, because no is so painful for people to contribute. But I want to get
Yes.
to your story because I know you were in the military. I know you've done quite a bit in your life, and I'd love for you to just talk about your beginnings and how you got to being who you are today and helping so many people.
Thanks so much, Lisa. You know that this is the part that's fun. It's fun to tell this story because, I think we want to inspire people with our stories, right?
Yeah.
And something a lot of people don't know is that my family came to the US when I was an 8-year-old. And
Um,
so we came from Mexico, and I was a Spanish speaker. That was my first language. And so when people hear me, they're like, "Well, I would have never known, Dan, based on how you speak today." But when we talk about things you overcome, I remember that was one of the first things I had to overcome. Coming to an elementary school where everybody speaks a different language, and you're the new kid. You come in January. I think we moved here in January, and then you start at a new school, and you don't understand anything going on, but I was blessed in that I had above average intelligence, and I was a quick learner. And so I learned English like within a few months. I remember watching Electric Company and Sesame Street and as much kids shows. So within 3 months, I was fluent and I was able to speak and
wow.
and get along with my classmates and understand. But also, as you can imagine, that also comes with a little bit of, hey, you're the weird kid that couldn't speak, the just 3 months ago. So there's always one kid that wants to pick on you. But I was lucky. I found a good little group of friends, and next thing I knew, I was just mainstream. And so, when I look back at what is it that makes you want to contribute, I remember to this day Miss Baker, my first teacher, and how kind and supportive she was. And I remember it was like 3 days in, Lisa. This is you talk about stage fright, right? 3 days in, the kids are reading out loud, and she's going down the rows, and the next person reads, and I get to, there's a kid who's been in the country in this school 3 days and doesn't speak the language, but I had to read out loud. And everybody giggled because, of course, I wasn't pronouncing it correct. But I remember how good it felt a year later when I was able to read, you know, fluently, and how proud Miss Baker was. And, you know, again, blessed with above average intelligence. I actually ended up in the gifted program by the time I was in the third grade and skipped a grade and all those good things that happen when you're blessed with the ability to learn fast. And so I was able to do that. And I just remember she would keep track of me, and she was so kind and nice. And those people are so important. I bet she was a contributor. She
Yeah.
just wanted to make a difference. So went to from that. My family moved. That our original move was to LA. My mom had a lot of family there. That's where we moved. But LA was not a great place to raise a family. My dad didn't like it, and he had friends in Albuquerque, which is where I've lived my entire life since we moved. And then so we moved the family when I was in middle school. So again, another tough thing, right? You're moving, you lose all your friends, and you're moving to a new place. Um, but that opened up a different avenue because I was a kid from the big city moving to Albuquerque, and it opened up the leadership path for me because suddenly, because I was the new kid from the big city, people want listen to me. And I had this little power as a sixth grader that, hey, I'm kind of cool, right? It was a new kid, but now instead of coming as the awkward kid that doesn't speak the language, I knew how to speak to everyone, and I had something cool. And so I became a little bit of a troublemaker and got in
You,
some
I can't even
trouble.
imagine that.
And oh, and once again, great people. So I remember I was a boxer, so I became a boxer, and so you're a boxer, you're from the big city. The kids are like, "Oh, that Daniel's really cool." And I started reading my own press clippings, right? And started believing it. And but I got in some trouble. I remember I got in a fight at school. And now so we talked about Miss Baker in second grade. Now let's talk about Miss Kaufman in sixth grade. She was the principal, and she's still a friend to this day. We stay in touch. And so Yvonne Kaufman calls me in her office, and I'm getting, I'm sitting there, my mom's coming, I know I'm going to be in trouble, I'm going to be suspended. And she says, Daniel, you have leadership ability, and you have a choice to use it for good or for bad. And I think you would do really well if you used it for good. And so here, instead of suspending me, she said, I won't suspend you if you'll attend this leadership training that we have for middle schoolers. And so that was, once again, somebody who wanted to make a difference for kids who normally can slip through the cracks. And next thing you know, they're getting in bigger and bigger trouble. And instead, I got leadership training, and I learned how to use your powers for good, become a positive leader in school, and that led to a whole different path where when I went to high school, I was class president and did all those things that leaders, good young leaders do. They get good grades, and I often think about what would have happened had she just done her job, which is, hey, you got in a fight, you're suspended. We'll see you in 3 days, and you go down a different path. So those were, a couple of things that I had to overcome, even really young.
It's interesting that you talk about these people who intervene. I always think of them as your guardian angels. And
Yes.
I saw someone speak, he had severe learning disabilities. And it was so bad he couldn't read. And every Friday was you had to take your spelling test, right? That was you
Mhm.
waited all week. And so he would skip school on Fridays so he didn't have to take those tests. And he talked about how he had this one teacher who believed in him and saw how smart he was and helped him propel. And I had that in my life too, because I had learning disabilities. And so I struggled in school, and I had an art teacher who saw that I was gifted in art and believed in me. So being that outside, they say you need someone outside of the family, because who's going to believe your mom? Your mom thinks you're wonderful no matter what, right?
Right.
Dad. But when you get a third party who believes in you and says that, that is huge. Being that mentor can change lives, and obviously it's made a huge difference for you.
Well, and I often get asked the question, so what makes you, Dan, want to give back? Right? What
Right.
makes you such a contributor? Well, I had strangers in my life, people who had no blood relation to me,
Mhm.
just step out of their way, and it's been a constant thing. And I think we all do, right? Some of us are blessed with amazing families and family support, and you don't need outside help. But I needed that help just to cultivate the person that I became. So to become a leader, a high school leader, to lead in a positive way, to then go on to become, I'm the first person in my family to go to college, first person in my family to graduate, to get an advanced degree, first person to graduate high school really with really high honors. But then that puts also pressure on you, right? So
Right.
then, so let's fast forward. There's so many people, and I'll get back to the thread. I think the golden thread here is the reason I am so I want to give back is because so many people have given to me.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that I'm that person for others who need it. So we get to graduating high school, graduate ninth out of 315 kids, and have lots of scholarship opportunities. But then I decide that one of the to give back, I want to join the army. And so instead of, senior year, I'm 18. I turned 18 in October of my senior year, so I could go to the recruiter's office, and I go do this thing, and I say, hey, I want to give back, because this is such a great country, right? It's been so good for me. I've got all these opportunities, and as an 18-year-old, I wanted to give back. My mom and dad said, hey, go for it. We think that's good if that's what you want to do. And so I get signed up. Then the very next week, I find out I have a full ride academic scholarship to the University of New Mexico. So I don't need to go in the Army to pay for college, because that was, the GI Bill and all that stuff. That's what I wanted to do. And one of the gentlemen who interviewed me for a big scholarship that was even bigger than the one I had for academics that I got, said, well, what do you mean you're going in the Army and you're in for 2 years before you start college? I said, well, that's the commitment I made. So I'm signed up. And he says, well, let's go visit that recruiter. And he went with me and we talked to the recruiter and explained to him, hey, look, Dan doesn't need to go in the Army to pay for college because this is what he's got. And the recruiter said, well, that makes a lot of sense, and let me out of my commitment and said, go to college and hopefully we see you back. And so he saw me back a year later, and then I joined the reserves while I was in college because I felt it was such a cool thing that he allowed me to out of my commitment that I wanted to, hey, I want you to hit your numbers too, because I know I impacted your numbers in a negative way. So I went back and I signed up to be in the Army Reserves, which then led to me being in the Army ROTC at the University of New Mexico. I was the commander of the ROTC unit my senior year. And then I became a commissioned officer. So I was an enlisted soldier in the reserves. And then I became a commissioned officer in my senior year, went on to serve on active duty, got to do some fun things in the Army, like Ranger School, like Airborne
Wow.
School, and learn leadership at a completely different level. So leadership has just always been a part of my life. I've experienced great leaders. I've experienced all types of leadership training from middle school, how to take a gang leader from a gang leader to a school student council leader to, obviously all the leadership exposure that we get in corporate and in the military. So, leadership kind of just, it resonates with me. And that's why my company is Why Not Leadership. I like helping leaders be better leaders.
So in that, when you talk about getting through, you finished up the Army, then where did your career progress from there? And how did you end up at the Y Institute?
So we go so let's take that back. So I spend 11 total years in the military. At that time I get married. My wife and
Wow.
I start our life together, and I'm a career guy. As far as anybody knows, Dan's going to stay in the military. He's going to retire because I was doing really well, getting good ratings, getting promoted on time as you're supposed to, right? Um, and one day we were in El Paso, Texas, me and my best friend Robert Poe. Robert says to me, "Hey, there's this dinner we get to go to that I got invited to. These recruiters are recruiting junior military officers for civilian jobs." And they invite us to this hotel and we get free dinner, but they're going to tell us about what the opportunities are out there. And so we go to this dinner and they start talking about what's out there. And so I get recruited by a company called Military Recruiters Incorporated, and what they specialize in finding junior military officers for companies that are looking for young leaders to come into their companies, right? And I end up leaving the military before my friend Robert. We both ended up getting out as junior officers, but I remember, that it was an opportunity to work for a pharmaceutical company that was recruiting, and I had 3 offers, and I could pick. And I remember coming home to my wife and going through the discernment, right? So she's like, well, so what's it like? What do you have to do? And it was a sales position, and I said, well, and my degree was in marketing, so I like that's a good fit, but so or what do you have to do? And she says, I said, well, it's 50% travel. And in the civilian world, that's different. 50% travel in the military, that's like you're gone half the year.
Right.
In the civilian world, that means you might have 2 or 3 overnights a week. And she said, so you're not going to be gone 6 months at a time. You mean you'll be home on weekends, right? And you'll be home 2 nights a week. I said, yeah. And she says, so, and when you travel, are you going to be sleeping on the ground in a sleeping bag and I said, no, we'll be in, they will have hotel and they'll pay for that. And she says, okay. And then, and your clients, will they be shooting at you? Well,
So
no,
funny.
so all of a sudden this civilian job sound, and it's like 3 times more than what you're making now, plus the ability to make commission because it's a sales position, right? And she's like, really, you're really thinking about this? So that was my decision. That was how I made the decision to leave the military and join the corporate world. And I sold a little known drug called Prilosec. we launched that drug. Back then it was low sec, and it had a black box warning, and nobody wanted to use it, Lisa. We had to beg physicians to take samples because it had a black box warning, because it had done some testing on it that caused cancer in rats when taken at 10,000 times the effective dose. So you can imagine there was hesitancy, but that started my sales career. So back in 1995, I began my sales career with a company called AstraZeneca, and did found that I did really well in sales. I think leadership lends itself to sales, and being a contributor, wanting to help people, lends itself to sales success, because I really just, I really believed and loved the message that there were people in this world suffering from heartburn that couldn't sleep at night,
Yeah.
and we had the medicine that could help them sleep at night. And now that I'm in my 50s, I see it too. I need one of those, right? But it is such an awful thing, and you could make a difference in the lives of people through the medicines that you brought to the world. And so I did that successfully. Got recruited from that into a medical device sales. So again, because we were working with a specialty drug that had a warning, I tended to work with gastroenterologists, Lisa.
Yeah.
And I got to know a group of gastroenterologists in my hometown. And one day I get called into their office, and the lead guy who's still a good friend of mine, Dr. Martinez, that calls me in. He says, Dan, we need a new scope rep for our endoscopes that we use in our practice. And I said, okay, well, that's good. What does that have to do with me? He says, well, Dan, we want you to be our scope rep. And I said, well, what do I have to do? Why me? He says, well, we all like you, and our scope rep is moving to another job, but we'd like you to be our scope rep. But he said, this isn't like what you're doing. This isn't salary plus commission. It's 100% commission, Dan. So we're about to, they give, I think the commission plan at that company was 10% of whatever you sold. And they said, but we're about to buy $500,000 worth of scopes. And so your first month, you'd make $50,000. So would you like to take the job? And I said, well, let me look at it. And once again, great people. Again, someone going out of their way saying, hey, we want you to be our guy. And I start with them. I get into the medical device world, successful there, and then get recruited by Baxter, which was where I spent a lot of my senior leadership time, and learned how to lead sales teams. And so, you just go from one leadership experience to another leadership experience to another leadership experience. And leading sales teams, I've got to tell you, was so much fun. It's almost as much as fun as leading troops.
But here's something that we talk about leadership and people drawn to you for that. But I think there's a trust factor that's involved, and you are also about relationships. So it's about connection for you. Because if you weren't connected to people, leadership wouldn't mean anything to you, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
and so you're about the people, and I think that's where the greatest leadership skills come from. I got the chills right now for saying that. And you lead from your heart. And that's where people come in and they're like, you know what, this is a likable guy. He's good for his word. And I know trust isn't in your why, but I bet it's really high up. It's probably number 4. Because it's like, okay, he's a man of his word, right?
Right.
And even it comes up in your story where you talk about going back to the military, the fact that he trusted you to let you out of your contract, and then out of a sense of obligation and wanting to do the right thing, you turned around and then you went back. And I
Yeah.
think that's a remarkable thing. I know there's a story about your daughter in here too, which I think is a remarkable thing. It also says something about your heart that I think would be a beautiful thing to share.
Yeah. Well, so we've I've kind of taken you from a 8 years old to now I'm a successful leader at Baxter Healthcare, a national sales director, and leading teams to exceed quota every year. And you're absolutely right. For me, it was always about the people. We always wanted to make sure everybody that worked for us could succeed as much as possible. And if they couldn't, could we help them succeed somewhere else? Right. Let's make sure people are in the right roles. But one of the things that led to as a national sales director, you can imagine, Lisa, when you're at a Fortune 100 and every time there was a big sale to be done at a Northwestern or at a Duke University Medical Center at Stanford, it would require sometimes that the national sales director go visit that account, right? So I was spending a lot of time on the road, a lot of time in hotels, just like my wife and I talked about 20 some years earlier, right? Yeah, you're going to be sleeping in hotels and you're flying and nobody's shooting at you, but it does take a toll on your family. And so I remember coming home when during that really busy, quote, successful time for me, and my wife handing me my daughter's journal and asking me to read it and sharing the story that was in there. And I said, well, what's in there? And she says, well, just read it. And I read. My daughter's talking about her upcoming birthday. And in her birthday, we have a small farm here in Albuquerque that we live on, and there's sheep and there's horse and there's chickens and her friends are there, and it's a great party. But she also talks about the fact that unfortunately my dad couldn't be there because he had to work. And that just hit here to me. And I said, well, wait a minute. And then she says, and I wanted to call him and thank him, but I didn't want to bother him because his work's important. And my work was important, but I didn't want her to think that it was more important than she was. And so I made a decision that wasn't how I wanted to end this story. And so she was 7 turning 8. She's now 12. And I made the decision to do something different, right? Lead differently. How can we do something different so that this story doesn't end that way? I'm 7 years away from the pension, which at Baxter was 80% of your 3 highest earning years. And that year was a really good year. I think my take home was like $500,000. So it's you're walking away from 400,000 a year for the rest of your life if you stay the 7 years for the pension. But also in 7 years, I said to myself, I'm going to have a daughter who doesn't know me, a 14-year-old daughter. And who wants to have a 14-year-old daughter that doesn't know her dad if you're the dad, right? And I'm also, and I thought about it and I joke, I said, I'm also 7 years away from splitting that pension with my future ex-wife at this rate, right? So is it you're only getting half of that big chunk of money that you
Yeah,
thought
as
you were
someone
going to get.
says, half of a lot is not very much.
Yes. Half of a lot. Yeah. And so I made the decision, and that's where I came to Y Institute. I decided to leave that world, and I didn't have a plan. And so that was scary. I just said, I'm going to be home. And I went to my financial advisor, Baxter gave me my money, gave me actually a really nice package. And I took that to my financial advisor and I said, hey, what can I do? How long do I have before I have to get back to work? And he said, you got a couple of years, Dan. Take your time. But I run into Gary Sanchez in the Y Institute, who he's been my friend at that point, 22 years. We've known each other. He's starting this new venture and he needs someone to help him with sales. So I decided to jump in with Gary, and that's what I did for the last 4 years. We had about 20 some coaches. We now got over 250 coaches all over the world. And as you said, Lisa, one of my most rewarding things that I did at Y Institute was build our community, build our coaching community, bring you guys together once a year where we could hug each other, shake hands, take pictures with each other, and just get to know each other and understand the diversity of the coaches that we brought into this world helping people discover their why. And that's what I did for 4 years until it got to the point where I felt like there was something more I could do. I think there's more I can do. I've led amazing people like Lisa and held her hand and helped her uh, uh, use this tool productively with her clients using all her amazing talents along with it. And people like Raymond Kemp, who you had on your show, who's just a dear friend of both of ours. There's so many great people that said, Dan, can I hire you to help me do this? And I said, well, no, because my role is to help bring in coaches. That's what I'm doing. But I started feeling that call. And so that's when I made the choice to talk to Gary and say, hey, Gary, I think I'm going to go do this for myself. I've been showing people how to use it. I want to go do this myself. And he's been so supportive, so fantastic, that, I look forward to being one of his success stories as one of our coaches. And, it's so far so good, Lisa.
Yeah, so I'd like you to talk about, because when you were early on with Gary, it was not just, here's an assessment, go take it, and here's your why, right? You
Right.
started out, and when I met you, the assessment was just your why, and then we spent an hour figuring out our how and our what. So when you came in, did he even have the assessment yet, or did you have to spend hours trying to figure it out with him?
Yeah. So yeah, that's great. That's a great question, Lisa. So the when I came in, the why existed, which is what you took, but I
Mhm.
also learned how to do it manually. So we used to be able to help people discover their why by asking them questions. And there was a series of questions. Gary developed a set of questions that we would ask. And based on how people answered, we would kind of figure out, okay, what's your why? And then we got into learning the how and the what, which is really important. So the why operating system, which we call it now. And what we found was that we were accurate about 70% of the time when we did it that way. Every once in a while, 3 out of 10 people would come back and say, I think maybe this is my how or this is my what. And we would adjust it and we would work through it and get to the right answer eventually. But that didn't allow us to scale. You couldn't scale if you were having to do that. And coaches, it's a lot of work to get through to the how and what manually. But when Gary in 2021, we sat down and he did the work to create the WHY.os assessment, which gives you the why, the how, and the what in 10 minutes or less. All of a sudden, coaches were like, this I can use because now I can get it done in 10 minutes. I know it's accurate and I can help people create their message. I can help people understand themselves, understand their strengths, understand their challenges that come with those strengths, and then how to overcome them so that when I'm coaching them, I can come in from a place of knowledge rather than a place of tell me more about yourself, right? That get to know each other phase of the coaching that can take a long time. And sometimes we find that we're coaching someone that's not a good fit for us. And it's 3, 4 months into the engagement. And now it's awkward, right? Now we've got to give money back or it's just or hand them off to someone else. The YOS allows us to not have to do that. So yeah, we learned it the hard way. Gary taught me the basics, the way we used to do it, and now we spend our time maximizing the results.
Yeah, it was interesting because I actually used to love going through the process of getting their why, because as a mindset coach, it helped me get into their process. But what I
Right,
love about having the assessment is you get the order of all nine, right?
right,
And so when you know what your least favorite one, because we have all of them, it also tells a lot about someone and the type of people who may trigger them, right? Because
right.
my so my why is I challenge conventional thinking. How I do that is making sense out of complicated situations and problems. And what I ultimately bring is the ability to be of service to others and help people with their mindset. I'm getting used to that one because I always use the other one that we come up
Right.
together.
Then we got the old fashioned way,
The
right?
old
Yeah.
fashioned way was challenge, better way makes sense, but I
Right.
realized that contribute is such a huge part of who I am and who I've
Mhm.
always been. And one of the hardest things for me was to learn to say no and set boundaries. And the least I shouldn't say favorite, but the hardest for me because as a challenge, I'm outside the box.
Right.
And then the right way people are inside the box. So when I'm
Mhm.
coming up with all these creative ideas and someone says no to me, I'm like, what do you mean you can't do it? For instance, just I had a deck off my bedroom. I have a log home and the logs were rotting. It was not flashed properly. And the beams on my house are this big. So to
Mhm.
replace a log that's big is terrifying, especially 5 or 6 of them. So everyone kept saying to me, can't be done, can't be fixed. This is the way it is. You're gonna have to cut them off or you're gonna have to replace them. And I found someone who was challenged, who thought outside the box like me and rebuilt the logs and used fiberglass and rebar and all kinds of stuff and made it strong so that I was able to save it. But when you have that thought process of always thinking outside the box, when you're working with someone who's very right way and structured, it can be a very difficult situation.
Hmm. Yeah. But isn't it great to know that, Lisa? I think Audre Lorde says, it's not our differences that separate us, it's our inability to understand and appreciate and celebrate those
Right,
differences, right?
right,
Because guess what? Those right way people aren't all bad because they create processes and systems, right?
right.
You and I could go through life and we would be so happy if we could just run red lights. But hey, we need rules in society so that we can live, right? We
Yeah,
don't want to have a bunch of collisions at intersections. So there's
right,
some laws and some rules that we have to follow. And what
yeah,
those right way people, I've really learned to appreciate them, Lisa, is they will create the systems and processes to take your brilliance, your amazing ideas, and make them repeatable. Because
right.
you may not have the patience to create the process in the system, but they will, and they'll say, "Oh, I saw what you did, and this is how you did it, and these are the steps that I think people can take in order to bottle that brilliance and share it with others."
You're absolutely right on that. And it was funny because I had a client who was challenge and then right way. And I remember calling you and going, "Oh my God, I found an anomaly." And I said, "Do you have arguments in your head?" He's like, "All the time." And I had to
Yes.
laugh because he's an outside the box thinker, but he's a brewer. And so
Hmm.
he needed to create the systems and processes because if he didn't have that beer brewed in the recipe exactly all the time, he'd be out of
Yes.
business. But he created
Right.
this really cool out of the box beer and company. So he was able to use that brilliance of both of them together, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, you normally have to go outside of yourself to find that number nine, right?
Right.
Usually, I mean, and I've done this, thousands of times with people. Usually, when challenge is number one, right way is usually number nine,
Yes.
and vice versa. When right way is number one, challenge is number nine. To find those people that have it one right next to the other, I think the way you described it, yeah, they have arguments with themselves inside their head, but then, to take those brilliant ideas and create a system and a process with
Yeah.
it is pretty darn cool.
So now you are contribute challenge makes sense. So I'd love for you to talk about what was it like when you realized that about yourself? I mean, I always say it's nothing really new from the standpoint of like earth shattering, but it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like I'm curious what it was for you and how that impacted you.
Gary says it all the time, and I say it too. My life made sense to me when I discovered my why, my how, and my what. So I've always been a person who wants to help others. And with the how of challenge, how I help people is by bringing different out of the box ideas to life in order to contribute. And a lot of people said, and then helping people make sense of it, right? So, even going back to my military days, people often say, well, how do you survive in the military with the how of challenge? And with me, it's really strong. A lot of people think it's my why. I was the commander of the ROTC at my college, but I was also the mascot at the same time. How many people do that? You know, you're the ROTC commander and also you're the school mascot. How many people do that? I've always been outside the box. There was a time when, even in the military, I was a quartermaster officer. I was a logistics officer, but I went to airborne and ranger school. Very few people do that because you don't need those skills when you're a logistics officer. You need those when you're an infantry officer. So I've always done things out of the box. And I started looking back at my life and I'd always done things different than everybody else in order to help. Right. And then I help people make sense of it. And so some people said, so how do you survive in the military with that mindset? Well, what we have to remember, and Mike Tyson, I love Mike Tyson's quote where he says, look, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. Right. And well, in the military, we're big on order and creating plans, but guess what? The battle doesn't always go the way you plan it. The enemy's going to do what they're going to do. And so having that challenge mindset to, hey, how can we adapt? Because we got to adapt quickly to the new information, the new way that it's happening. So the plan is out the window. And having a challenge, how I think helped me adapt quicker and make sense. Is all about making quick decisions,
Yeah.
understanding, taking the information and making decisions. So it actually helped me succeed because the planning and everything else had to be done. We did it, But then once we get into now we're having fun because we don't know what's going to happen. And that's where the challenge mindset really helped me. And so it's always been there. And like you said, and it's part of who we are. But now I had a language to be able to explain it to people. And that was really what I had to overcome, because I think for me, it's all the thing that I've always struggled with is structure, rules, and having to do things by the book. I do well when I'm giving a wide berth, right? If you put me in a box, I don't do so well.
It's interesting you talk about that in the military, because I had that conversation with Raymond Kemp as well, who was the first African-American fleet master chief over 2 continents. And he
Right,
started out as an enlisted man, really working himself up from maintenance all the way
right,
up. And I said to him, because he's got challenge as well. And I said, how did challenge work for you? And he said it was a struggle, but he needed the leaders, the visionaries, they always say, are the challenge and better way people, the people who
right,
see things before everyone else does. So when you
right,
have someone who's a challenge, it can be hard for other people because, well, for me, as being challenged as well, it's like waiting for people to catch up, you know? It's
right,
like when you see something and no one else sees it, and then there's a trust factor that happens because they trust you. And so they're
right,
gonna go with you because you have a track record. Okay, Dan sees something that we don't see, and we're gonna trust him and go along with him. So I think that's where the challenge comes in. I think you have to have, in order to be a true leader, you have to have that trust factor, and that's where you contribute also comes in very strongly. And Raymond has that too.
right. I think he's better way, challenge, contribute, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the important thing that you brought up, and I've always thought about this, is even counseling leaders. When I was a senior leader, there was a question that I've learned to ask when before I counsel someone, is to say, "Hey, do you believe that I have your best interest at heart?" And if they say yes, then we can have a real honest conversation.
Right.
Right? If you can't say yes to that question, then I as a leader have some work to do before I can counsel you and lead you in a different direction. Because if you don't think I have your best interest at heart, then you're not then what I say is going to be meaningless. But if you can honestly say, "Yeah, I do believe that." Okay, here are some things you're doing that I don't think are going to lead to career success, and these are things that I feel that we need to work on. And so now they're seeing it. I always said, you start with love. You got to start with love. And I know that sounds weird coming from a military and a corporate guy, but you people have to understand that you genuinely care for their success. And when they do, then they'll run through a wall for you.
Yeah.
These, I think, I talk about that in my podcast. I say, look, there are 2 types of leaders in this world. There are the leaders that, and you've had these leaders, or you might have been one of these leaders, Lisa. There are those leaders that we would run through a brick wall for. And there are those leaders that the only reason we did what they asked us to do was because they were the boss. Now, given a choice, I know which leader I'd want to be.
Right, because here's the thing. Do you want attrition? Do you want to keep turning over people? Or do you want people who are loyal to you? You know, that there are people who will take, they've done studies, people will take less money to work for a great leader. And that
Right.
doesn't mean you pay them less. It's just the point is that, I worked in the fashion industry when I got out of college, and I worked for some of the most abusive bosses. I don't even want to call them leaders because they weren't leaders.
Right.
But I tell the story of how the fellow who owned the company where I worked at, we had to get to work. And if you work in New York City, to get to work at 7 a.m., you had everyone, even if you lived in the city, you had an hour commute. And I was commuting an hour and a half each way. So I had to be at work by 7 in the morning, couldn't leave till 7 at night, and we were not allowed to leave our desks for lunch. And this was before cell phones. So they were good to pay for our lunches. So we would order our lunches, they'd be delivered to our desks. And then once a week, he would walk through and he would take a bite of our sandwich, stick his hand in your French fries. It was the most disgusting thing you would imagine. And he hired young women who didn't have a voice. And we'd all sit there cowering as he would go from cubicle to cubicle, taking a bite out of our sandwiches or whatever we were eating. He would leave, we would get up and throw out our lunches and order another round. And so he was always in this place of creating fear
Mhm.
and always on the edge, like never knowing where you
Right.
stood. And his children would come in and run around the office yelling, "You're fired, you're fired, you're fired." And we were what the heck?
Oh my gosh.
No, it was insanity. And I remember like crying every day, "Get me out of here,
Mhm.
get me out of here." And I thought to myself, life has to be more than being abused by people all day
Right.
long and going home and going to sleep. And when
Yeah.
you have a situation where you have someone, in your case, who's a leader and cares about people, you keep people longer, people get along with each other, understand what their best skills are. Now, as a leader, I'm curious, what types of companies do you like to go into and how do you impact, like what's a great impact that you've had, if you have any stories, how even using the why?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So it's not so much companies, Lisa. I like to work. For me, it's working with leaders. So
Mhm.
the leaders that I like working with are leaders who want to connect better with their teams.
Mm.
If you're a leader, because here's what happens in leadership, and it happens whether it's accounting, sales, medicine, law, the best leader doesn't get promoted to a leadership position. It's the best performer. We promote people based on skills,
Right.
right? So if you're the best salesman, you're going to get promoted. And I'll talk about sales because that was my career path. So you get promoted to regional manager. And so now you go from being Lisa's peer to being her boss, but you've gotten no leadership training. All they've said is, hey, by the way, now you're the regional manager, and all those people that you used to work with are now they're working for you because your boss left, and now we're promoting you because you were the best salesman of all the people that were in that group. Well, what if you have no desire to lead? You don't want to manage people. You don't want to manage all that stuff. You want to sell, and that's what you love doing. But now you're in charge, and so what we'll do is, as humans, is we're going to go back to what worked for us. And so I'm going to come to Lisa and say, hey, Lisa, this is how you got to sell because this was what worked for me. And so this is how I'm going to manage my people to sell like me. And so there's so many people out there that get bullied into a leadership position, and not in a bad way. They just, hey, you're really good and we're going to promote you, and they give you a bigger salary, a bigger office, a nicer car, more travel, blah blah blah. And you almost can't say no, but you're not in a great leadership position. I was blessed to have leadership background. So when I got put into a leadership position, I knew how to lead, but so many people don't. And so, I hear from leaders all the time, nobody wants to work. And I posted about this recently. I said, maybe nobody wants to work for you. And right. And so oh yeah. So if you're a leader who's saying nobody wants to work, take a look internally and figure out whether is it that nobody wants to work and nobody wants to work for you. And if you're ready to do that work, to get to know yourself better. So the teams I work with, the way I like to work, Lisa, is I like to help leaders understand themselves. Then I like to help their teams understand themselves also. Then we get into the work of, hey, now that you understand yourselves, you leader understand yourself, your direct reports understand themselves. Now let's understand each other. And when they start understanding each other, we get those right way challenge conversations, those mastery simplify conversations where mastery wants to dig deep and know everything they can, and simplify people want to just get to the bottom line and get to work. A challenge wants to do it out of the box, right way wants to do it exactly how it's supposed to be done. We get into all those differences that people have and understanding them, as we talked about. Let's understand those differences and then let's celebrate them because we need those differences within our company. And then for the last part, when I bring a team together, is we understand the leader. Because what I have found is really powerful. Leaders would come to me afterward and they would say, oh gosh, Dan, it's so good that they now know how I tick. Because the conversations that we're having when they come to my office with a problem, with a challenge, with an idea are so much better. Because if I'm going to go to Lisa, if she's my boss, and her why is challenge, her how is make sense, and her what is contribute, I know how to talk to her because she wants to hear how my idea is going to be different. How is it going to change the world? How is it out of the
Right.
box? She wants to know, hey, does it make sense? What problem does it solve, Dan? And then how is it going to contribute? to others.
And that lights me up, right?
Right?
And I even laugh because I don't ever like to take someone else's stuff and then just can it and then make it mine,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because it's gotta have a twist to it. It's gotta have something unique that's uniquely mine. And so I was shocked at how drawn I was to the why, and I loved it because it was different.
Right.
And so, and there was nothing really for me to improve upon. Like you guys have, there was always this better way, better way, better way. So there was always
Right.
this improving upon it and open to that, which I love about the organization. So, it was interesting in when you talk about teams, I worked with an organization who, they were having this problem where they were losing clients and they were
Mm.
trying to figure it out. Well, their head of customer service and repairs, because it was a manufacturing company, they was mastering.
Mm.
So it would take him so long to get back to people because he wanted to have all the information.
Right.
And so people were leaving because he wasn't responding quickly.
Right.
And what they realized is that they needed someone, just, you don't need to get all the information. That's your first inclination to do that because you want to have all the answers. You can get back to them and say, I'm working on it, or let someone else be in that position, because I don't think he even really enjoyed being in that position.
Right.
He wanted to do the repairs and do the digging. So when you find out what someone's wise, you can make sure they're in the right position as
Right.
well as the right language promoting them. Like when you talk about, I love the idea of when you promote someone into, sales, when they move up, a lot of them, people will say like, I don't have those kind of people skills because it feels like I'm babysitting now. Instead of
Mhm.
getting out there and having the autonomy of having your own schedule, now I have to watch over all of these people.
Right. Well,
It's
it's
different.
management, right? And
Yeah.
and companies will they'll have structures so you can manage people, but leading people is a totally different.
Right.
You don't exceed quota every year because you're managing your team. You exceed quota when you lead your people and they want to do better because you're their leader, because they want to run through that brick wall for you. You want to get to know people. Again, there's all kinds of different ways. So you can manage salespeople, you can manage engineers, you can manage accountants, you can manage lawyers. But if you want to lead people and you want them to get the best out of them, I've always been known as a developer of leaders,
Mhm.
even when from the time when I was in the military to the time when I was at Baxter, my people always got promoted. And I
So
like that because
what's
you
your
get them ready.
secret? What's your secret? Like, what's the difference? I'd love for you to talk about the difference between managing and leading. Like, what is that thing that brings that spark out in someone that would normally lie dormant?
Well, this is a great topic, and I'm actually going to do it on my podcast, Lisa. And by the way, I want to make sure I get you on my podcast. But one of the things I'm doing is I'm interviewing the great leaders that I worked for. From my first guy that I worked for when I left the military, Ed Smith, I've already interviewed him, to Keith Coney, who was my leader when I was at the medical device company selling endoscopes, to my first leader at Baxter, Bruce Dayton, then Dave Lambert. And then I started looking at what did they do really well? You know what they did is they led me individually.
Hmm.
It's easy to say, everybody, I want you to do this. It's a lot harder, but a lot more efficient, effective, and more connected to say, Lisa, this is how you're different and unique. And let's create a plan for you. You can't do it the way Kevin does it. You're going to do it a little bit differently. So let's come up with your plan. And oh, by the way, what are your goals? What is it? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And how can I help you? Right? It's about when you make it about them, it's not about the goal. Hey, we know we have a number to hit. That's not that you're not surprising anybody. If you're a lawyer, you have cases you have to try. If you're an accountant, you have clients who you have to serve. If you're a doctor, you have standards you have to meet. Guess what? We know that. What's your plan? How can I help you? And I think if you start with that, and I've done that in sales my entire career, you don't go into a client and say, hey, how much of my product do you want to buy? You ask, how can we help you succeed? How are you planning on using this? And if it's a fit, I think I can help you. And if it's not a fit, I'm going to be honest with you and say, you know what? I think you probably need to go X, right? The why discovery, the WHY.os certification wasn't for everyone. I had people who said, I need something with a little more depth. I want, so they might be somebody that needed CDR or Colby or something that came at it from a different angle. And I knew people who sold that, or they could go to that, could understand that. And so you gain credibility with your direct reports, with your clients, by making it about them, not about you. It's about the questions you ask, not about the answers you give.
It's interesting because the first thing I think of when you do that is, if anyone's a Seinfeld fan, George Costanza on the opposite day. It's like, do the opposite of your
Yes.
instinct, and then he ends up getting promoted. So,
Right.
these are things that should be, I think, about intuitive, right? These are things that
Right.
should be the first thing that we do, is think about what are the goals of the people who work with us? What are their skill set? How can we best guide them? But instead, it's all about, how are you going to help the company succeed? How are you going to make your
Mhm.
numbers? And just the difference of the reframe of that can make
Right.
the difference of someone staying and enjoying their job, and also having family balance, because that was something that was so important to you, and you also have a huge understanding of that. And so I think that's a big part of your message, even though you don't talk about that a lot here. And I've had the gift of meeting your daughter, Sophia, and who's a remarkable young woman. And how old is she now?
She's now 12 years old, going on 40, as you know.
Yeah, um, really, really special, and I excelling at almost everything that she does, and I can see the impact that you and your wife have both had on her, that allowing her to grow and giving her those the opportunity for her to excel in the things that she loves to do.
Lisa, that's so kind of you. I think we have to remember what our mission in life is, right? I have a 34-year-old daughter who's also killed it. We raised her, and she went to undergrad, got her MBA. She's given us two beautiful grandchildren that we're going to go visit this week in
Mhm.
Chicago. And her, she's married to a wonderful, wonderful young man whom I absolutely love. And they're just building this life together around their family. And I almost see it as, hey, if you have children, there's a responsibility you have. And my oldest will tell you, I used to tell her all the time when she'd say, Dad, that's not fair. And I'd say, my job's not to be fair. My job is to raise a responsible, productive member of society. That's what society expects from me. And
Mhm.
if I don't do that, then I'll have failed society. So I can't fail society, because my job's to make you a productive, contributing member of society. And she says today, she's like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, I'm so glad you did that." Because she's 34 years old. So some people in her generation don't have the work ethic that she does. They don't have the sense of responsibility and sense of duty that she does. But she brings that from her upbringing. And the
Yeah,
best compliment you can pay me is what you just did, just talking about what a special child Sophia is. And when people say, you know what, your parents are doing a good job. You're so polite. You're so kind and so smart and so caring. We pass that on. So yes, I want to build Why Not leadership into a successful venture.
yeah,
Yes, I want to help as many people as I can, but you have to remember that that starts at home.
yeah,
You have to help the people around you, your own kids, your family, your husband. My wife is going through a tough time right now caring for her mom. And so I have to remember to contribute to her
right,
because she needs my help right now. And so those things you have to prioritize appropriately. You got to pay the bills.
yeah,
We understand that. We need paying clients in
yeah,
order to pay the bills. But we also, what I have found too, Lisa, if I called you this morning and said, "Hey, Lisa, I have an issue. Here's what's going on. Can we reschedule?"
sure,
99% of people are going to be okay. And that 1% that aren't okay, you probably don't want to work with them anyway.
yeah. No, no. And that's where I say you lead with your heart. Your contribute stands out there so strongly. And these are the people who are the leaders that we want to be with. And it's not something you lead by example. So even though you might work with someone who doesn't have contribute high up, when you're working with someone, when they experience that and they get to feel, because feeling how you make people feel, that's what contributors do, right? So when someone is impacted by you making them feel a certain way, they're like, oh, what if I could make other people feel this way too? I think it can be
Mhm.
contagious.
Oh, that's really good. It's one of the things. I kind of segment who I will work with. And I've almost made it a rule, Lisa, that I don't want to work with a leader if they don't have contributor trust in their top three,
Mhm.
because that makes them a people first leader. Why not leadership's not for everybody. We want to work with people first leaders. We want to work with people who want to build innovative, strong teams that have staying power. And we want to work with people that are wanting to build better relationships in both their business and their personal life. So, what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to look for that trust and contribute. But if it's not in there, we're going to have a conversation. And I'm going to try to figure out, do you want to get better at that? Just like you said, are you so business by the book that your people don't know anything about you and you don't know anything about them? Which leads to attrition, right? People will stay where they feel seen, heard, and understood. And if you don't know anything about your employees other than what their numbers are, then you've probably got a retention issue. And so those are the people I want to work with. And I will lead by example. I will take my time to get to know Lisa Schermerhorn far above and beyond whether or not she's going to get signed up with us and whether or not she's using her certification. We will have a relationship, and that doesn't take a lot more time, but it makes a huge difference.
Right, right. So, is there anything that we didn't cover that you do want to talk about, things that you're working on or that, what you're looking for in clients? I know you talked about, what are some examples of a situation that someone might be going through, the way they might want to hire you or bring you in?
Yeah. So the people I want to work with, like I said, is
Mhm.
if you're a leader and even if you have a high performing team and you want to perform even better, bring me in.
Yeah.
If you don't feel like you're connecting with your team, you feel like, hey, everything's going well, but I want to connect better. If you're jealous of that other your competitor because you and he are or she are competing at a really high level, you're competing for the same business, but he just gets along so well with his people. What is it about me? Hey, let me help you figure that out. I love bringing teams together. I have a singular goal in 2024, Lisa, and that is to conduct 56 team workshops. You and I worked on a couple that you did last year, right?
Yeah.
I love doing those team workshops. That's what energizes me. Being in a room with a group of the led and their leader and helping them come together for better performance. To if they're already performing better, let's be even better. If they're not performing well, let me help you perform even better through understanding each other. I had a leader hire me last week who said, it was great. We went through his WHY.os and he says, you know, well, the feedback I'm getting is that I'm short with people. Well, he makes sense. Simplify, contribute, right? So he's all about, hey, what's the problem? Let's fix it. Let's make it simple and let's get to work. And the contributes there, but it's number three. But the first thing he cares about is, hey, what problem are we solving? How do we make it simple? And then as we started talking, his wife is, oh gosh, better way mastery. Said his how is simplify, right? So
And they're still
just even
married?
they're still together, but just them understanding that about each other. I said, Michael, so you just want the bottom line, just give me the three things I need to do. And she wants to know everything. He's like, oh my gosh, she does. And she's like, yes, he drives me crazy. He wants me to distill stuff that's so complex simple. And she's like, it's not that simple. And he's like, oh yeah, it is. Just give me. And so already just meeting with the two leaders, we've already got the genesis for the team workshop that we're going to do. But his challenge is he doesn't feel, he says, people say, well, you seemed mad. And I'm like, well, yeah, because you come at it from a, hey, just give me what's the problem? How do we fix it? And how do we make it simple? And so you just come across as all business. And but we can help with that. Let's help you understand yourself. Let's help them understand you. And let's see how much better you guys connect after we're done with that workshop. So 56 workshops. Haven't filled the calendar. So if you're a leader that's looking for someone to help you come in and understand yourself, your team, and have them understand you, that's what I want to do in 2024. And then I do some individual coaching. So I'm doing some work to get working with leaders like Michael who want to say, hey, I want to go a little bit deeper into me. And so we have some other things that we do for those leaders. But the number one singular goal is to help 56 teams in 2024 connect better with each other.
Wow, that's an awesome goal. And I know you're gonna exceed that.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, that's the plan, and we're getting the calendar is filling up, and so we want to do as many of those as possible, and then share those lessons. Of course, it wouldn't be me if it wasn't. So I can't wait to share the lessons. I am launching a new podcast, the Lead Different podcast. So you're going to be a guest on it, and we're going to talk about how to lead different, not differently. And so I'll give you. Let me show you what challenge does, right? Because my wife said, shouldn't that say lead differently? The correct English would be that. I said, yes, but the people I want to attract are the people that don't have a problem with the fact that it's grammatically incorrect. If you've got a problem with that, we're probably going to have a hard time connecting, right? If that, oh gosh, can you please fix that? I can work with you. No, I'm not going to fix that. I want the outside of the box thinkers who are like, that's different. I want to play with that.
That's awesome. So I'm gonna have all your information, your links and everything, so people will be able to find you. And again, thank you so much. This was so wonderful. I loved having this conversation with you.
Lisa, you're amazing. You're one of my inspirations for doing the work that I do. I love everything that you've done. I loved your book, and Every Belief is a Lie. And I'm a fan of Lisa Schermerhorn. So if you're a friend of Lisa's, or if you get a chance to work with Lisa, I highly recommend her. And I am so glad to be in your world and have you be a part of mine. So thank you.
Thank you. And you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Lisa.